Hello, everybody, and welcome to this web event, this web lecture event today, this afternoon. It's the healing power of stillness, and I am Laurie Snork Yates, and we'll be spending about the next hour together talking about how stillness can help find healing in your individual lives. And I will share different stories from my life and my practice of healing, and I hope that you hear something that touches you that you can take away with you for the rest of your day and put it into practice in your own life. Before we get fully started, I'll just give you a few logistical items as people are joining us on this web event. First of all, you right now are able to see me full screen on your computer, wherever you are. But in a little bit, I'll be sharing some slides. And so as you see the slides on the screen, there will be a little box on the right hand, well, on one side of your screen, where you'll see a miniature image of the speaker, of me, and you have the opportunity to toggle between either seeing me full screen as the speaker or seeing the slides full screen. So if you are interested in playing around with your controls a little bit, you can toggle and choose the way that you would like to view this web event. So hopefully that is clear. In addition, you have a question and answer box. It should be down in your control panel. And that's where you can type in any questions or comments or anything that you would like to add in during this web event. So there'll be a question and answer time at the end. And so those questions or comments that are in that question and answer box we'll address near the end of this web event. And then finally, there will be opportunity for each one of you to interact with the webinar, with this web event. So I will pose a couple of questions during the event, and there will be a separate box, not the question and answer box, but a chat box that will come up. You probably have on your toolbar something that says chat right now, and at the moment it's turned off, but I will switch it on at one point during the web event, and then you all can we'll type in your responses, and then we'll share them sort of as a group. So just be ready, if you're near your computer, be ready to sort of type in and chat in your responses to the questions. So that is it. Welcome, and glad you're all here, and we will go ahead and get started. And so I'm just going to pull up some of these images now. And you should be seeing in just a minute here a picture on your screen of a cellist. And this is where you can now toggle between how you'd like to view the web event this afternoon. So to start off today, in thinking about the healing power of stillness, as I said, I hope that as I share from my heart and my experience of healing and practice of healing, that you just hear an idea speaking to your own heart and listen to that, to whatever ideas are coming to you during this event, because that's the real message that you need for today. And when I think about this concept, this idea, the healing power of stillness, the reason this topic came up for me so many years ago when I started working with it was because I realized the importance of how all of our best thoughts come in those moments of stillness. And whether it's looking for ideas, spiritual ideas for healing, or creativity for our lives, or innovation in our businesses, or solutions to long-standing world problems, that those are birthed in those moments of stillness. It really mirrors the sense of divine creation based in the Bible, that that God moved upon the face of the waters, and it was dark, and there was a void. It was all still, and that's where creation came from. And it's the same for us today, that the stillness, finding that deep settled peace and stillness inside, is what allows us to find and access our best thinking, our best thoughts, which bring us forward and bring society forward. So I'm just going to start off with a story that you see on your screen, The Cellist of Sarajevo. It's a story that I heard a couple of years ago that just really touched me a lot. And it speaks about a man who goes into the center square of Sarajevo in 1992. And he plunks down a plastic chair and a cello case, and he takes out his beautiful instrument, and he's dressed as if he was giving a concert, an informal concert wear. And he sits down in the middle of the square of Sarajevo, and he starts to play the cello. And in the background, while he's playing, there are artillery shells falling on buildings, and people are running for cover because it's the start of the Bosnian Civil War. Yet he continues to play. And not only does he come this one day and just play some music in the middle of Sarajevo, but he comes back for 22 consecutive days to commemorate 22 men, women, and children that were killed at the start of the war while waiting in a bread line. Now, when I heard this story, it really touched me and got me asking the question, what would it take to be able to go out into the middle of this war zone and sit there and be so filled with peace and stillness that you could play your music like that? And for us, now I hope that most of you are never in that kind of a situation in your lives where there's a war zone physically around you. But it makes me ask the question, when I'm being bombarded by things going on with my kids, by family issues, maybe something in the society, community I'm involved in, or maybe just from news reports in the world that I'm hearing, and it feels like my thoughts are being bombarded. Can I do the same? Can I bring stillness to everything I have to do during the day? Can I access that peace and that stillness and bring it to my whole schedule on any given day? And that's the question that we're going to look at today. What is this stillness? How exactly do we access it? And then from there, how can we maintain it even when we feel bombarded, when we're feeling that there are things that would try to shake us off of our sense of equilibrium? Like this cellist, how can we maintain that sense of stillness? Now, the next quote here on your screen says, it's a quote from a woman named Pam Brown. And she says this: "At the center of the most turbulent heart, there is a place of peace, a place beyond time that cannot be touched by change or loss. No tumult can disturb the quietness. No shadow can dim the light. Here, in this stillness, is rest and healing. Nothing we suffer, nothing that we fear can damage its perfection." Now, there's a couple of things I love about this quote if we sort of unpack it a little bit. First of all, it talks about how the stillness is already within our hearts, that it can't be touched by outside events in our lives, that no matter what hardships any of us have gone through, no matter what difficulties someone might have experienced in their life, in their childhood, or in any point in their experience, that at the center of their being is this idea, this place of pure stillness that has not been touched by those outward events, by those experiences. That even if outside of us is very tumultuous or difficult or challenging, or we're going through a really dark period or a rough time, that quietness does not get dimmed. That light inside doesn't get shadowed by whatever events we might be experiencing or going through. I love the sense too that the stillness is where the rest is for us. That as much as we think that we find rest at the end of our day by going to sleep, to me what this says is that we can find the rest during our day in the midst of the activity. That we don't have to flop down in bed at the end of the day, completely exhausted, waking up the next day to sort of do it all over again. That we can find a renewal, that each day has this renewed sense about it, that we're not waking up the same tomorrow morning as we did this morning, that there's been progress, there's been movement, there's been unfoldment of new ideas and new things going on. So we don't wake up the same tomorrow that we did today, that there's this evolution and progression of thought. And that because of that it's in those moments of stillness that we find that true sense of rest. It's a rest in that sense of peace. And that there's nothing we can do that can remove the stillness from us. So I know for me, there have been times in my life where I've gone places or been mountain climbing or have been at a beautiful beach at sunrise. There's numerous experiences that have represented this sense of stillness and brought this sense of stillness to my life. But the question I always have after those sort of epic moments is, how can I bring this back and maintain it in my daily life with bills to pay and kids to raise and meals to make in the evenings and a home to take care of, et cetera, et cetera? How can, in the middle of our daily lives, can we maintain that sense of vibrancy, the sense of calm, the sense of peace about life? And that's, for me, the ultimate question. But what this says is that we're not looking to find it through a change in our external circumstances. We're looking because we're only looking within, because that's where the stillness is, and that's where we find it. Now, there's an analogy that has helped me to think a little bit more about stillness, and I'll just pause for a minute here and talk about that this stillness that we're talking about today. The way I define it is that it is a conscious, constant capacity to understand and feel the presence of God. So in those moments of stillness, it's the opposite of being empty. I know sometimes there's been talk about kind of emptying out your mind or your thoughts. And I think that's the first step, is just like Jesus talked about going into the closet and he said, shut the door and pray. So for me, that sense of being in that closet and making sure the door is shut is the emptying of all of the thoughts that will go over and over and over in our heads all day long. So that's an important first step. But as we do that, then what happens is we become conscious of the fullness and the vitality and the vibrancy and the love and the joy of life that comes from knowing God. And that as that divine presence, the divine idea of God's presence fills us up in those moments of stillness, that we gain clarity and purpose, and we feel really connected and aligned to that divine presence. So this, you see on your screen right now a picture of a cello, and I'm just gonna continue this analogy a little bit with the cello and the music today, because this analogy has helped me to think about what we're doing in this practice of stillness and trying to find healing. So here's the analogy. So I've spent many hours sitting in violin and cello lessons with my kids over the many, many years that they've taken lessons. And the very first thing that they do when they get to their lesson is to tune their instrument. Even if they just tuned at home and then they drive to their lesson, inevitably it's a little out of tune. And so the very first thing when they sit down to practice or when they go to their lesson is that they have to tune their instrument. And the way they do this is by putting on a tuner. And the tuner plays a pure, perfect tone, a certain note. And then they play that same note on the instrument. And at the beginning, you can hear this vibration in the air because it's inevitably out of sync. And as you look at your screen, you'll see the little knobs at the bottom of the cello there. And those little black knobs are the fine tuning knobs. And then my son would turn the fine tuning knobs on his cello until his cello lined up perfectly with the tuner. And in that moment, it sounds like there's only one sound being played in the room. They get so perfectly aligned that you can't distinguish between the original tone from the tuner and then the one being played on the instrument. It just sounds like one experience of a tone. And that, to me, is what stillness is about. That sometimes our lives feel like they've gotten out of tune a little bit with God or with spirit or with this divine presence of life. I know that years ago, someone shared with me this insight about the 80-20 split, which I think was in a book maybe a few years ago or something. And so it was talking about the way this divide of 80-20 happens. And it occurred to me at the time that that can happen with our own spiritual lives sometimes, that we start to feel like, for those of us that are committed to spiritual growth and wanting to sort of self-examine and pray and get closer to God and grow spiritually on a regular basis, that I know at the time when I heard this, it felt a little bit like that was the 20% of life. So maybe I would get up in the morning, for example, spend some time in prayer, in reflection, doing some writing, and I would kind of get clear at the start of my day on my identity, spiritually speaking, my understanding of God. In Christian Science practice, we have a Bible lesson every week that comes out. And so I would use the passages from the Bible and from another book called Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, which you can see on your screen now, these two books, and I would pray with them and the ideas from them. And that would sort of help bring me into that space of focusing my day at the start of the day. But then it felt like the 80% of my day was being a mom and driving my kids around. And at the time, I think I was a graduate student. So I was in graduate school and working diligently on my graduate studies and papers. And I was teaching at the same time. So I had students I was teaching. And all of that felt like the 80%. And the 20% was kind of that sacred time in the morning. And then someone challenged me to think about a 100% perspective, that in reality, in spiritual reality, that we're not an 80-20 split. We're not sort of 20% spiritual trying to be, or 80% kind of human doing things, and then 20% trying to be spiritual. That we're actually 100% a spiritual being. And we may be having this kind of human experience, but we're 100% spiritual. It's not that in those moments of prayer or in church or in, that those are the real spiritual moments. And then the rest of it is all just the stuff that, doesn't matter. It's all spiritual. And I started to really see my day differently and realize that in the shopping at the grocery store or teaching in my graduate program, teaching my students, or all of the other things that I had to do, how could I see those things also from the perspective of being still, of the perspective of being spiritual? And I think that idea of the alignment that we just talked about, that as we are tuning ourselves to God, like the instrument tunes itself to the perfect tone of the tuner, that sometimes we feel like our lives have gotten out of sync or out of tune, or they just need a little tune up to really kind of focus on God. But as we do that, and the practice of stillness has helped me so much with this, that getting still in the middle of my day is like turning those little fine-tuning knobs on the instrument. It realigns thought with what God is, what spirit is, what life divine is, what divine life is all about. And that's what helps me think about this 100% idea, that it's not about an 80-20 divide, where my spiritual life is always kind of sort of pushing up against all the human stuff I have to do, but it really helps us to look out from that spiritual perspective. So as I mentioned, these two books are the foundation of our talk today and the foundation of my Christian Science practice as a Christian Science practitioner, which is what I do full time. So I work with people who are relying on prayer for healing, and I help them to find healing in all aspects of their lives. And so this Christian Science is based on in the Bible, and also this book, Science and Health, with Key to the Scriptures, written by a woman named Mary Baker Eddy. And it's the quintessential textbook on Christian Science. Now, our keynote ideas for today come from those two books. The first one is from the Bible, and it just simply says, "Be still and know that I am God." Now, how many directions do you hear in this short phrase? Right? There's two, right? You should hear two things. So you've got the first part, be still, and then the second part, which is to know that I am God, to know God. All right, so how do we do that? That's the question, right? So the being still, which we talked about, really involves, it can be a physical stillness. It can be that we need to sort of slow down maybe, or take a break or pause in the middle of our activity. So that can help. But even more than the physical pausing, it's a thought process. It's stilling our thoughts and noticing the way that they can race and race and race and get real intense or focused on certain things, and really try to just calm them down and quiet all of the racing thoughts to find that place of stillness, like going into that closet, that mental closet. And then the second direction is to in that place of stillness, to know God, to know that God is on the scene, that he's got this, that he's that God as an idea is in charge. And let's just clarify for a moment what we mean by God today, that God in Christian Science is a universal divine presence of love and principle and power. As much as we may still talk about God as Father, we actually talk about God in Christian Science as Father, Mother. It's a balance of the masculine and feminine ideas. It has mothering qualities that comfort and guide us, as well as fathering qualities of principle and discipline that help us through life. And as much as we think about God in those affectionate terms, God doesn't represent a personage of any sort, a sort of personified image of a father or mother. That fathering or mothering influence is really about understanding God as the all-pervasive love, powerful love that is so closer to us than our own thoughts, that it comes to us and speaks to our heart. And that in the stillness is where we hear, in sort of that still small voice way, that we hear in that stillness, that voice of God, the ideas that come from God, inspirations that we didn't think about, that we're not consciously coming up with, that we hear just a direction or an idea and we go and do it and we realize later what a blessing it was. That's the voice of God. It speaks to our own hearts. And there's another passage we'll touch on briefly later, but it's also from Psalms, and it says, "Be still and seek God." That's a little bit of a paraphrase, but this idea of and then there's another one too. So there's the seek God one, and then there's be still and commune with your own heart upon your bed. Or in other words, be still and search your heart silently. Search your heart silently for God, because that's where we hear God, is when we search in our own consciousness, that we hear those messages from God, and when all the other thoughts and planning and doing is all silenced. So be still and know that I am God is a two-part direction, and that's really kind of the keynote for our whole event this afternoon. In fact, we could just stop now and just leave it there, because that's all you need to know. It's just be still and then know that presence of God. But we will go to another idea, and Mary Baker Eddy sort of clarifies this in a way, or takes it to a different sense, and she talks about how we hear God when the senses are silent. And it's a simple idea, but it really does take us to just, again, quieting all of the thoughts and quieting the talking and all the things going on, so that we can really listen for God's voice. When I first traveled in Africa, I think it was when I maybe went to Kenya for the first time, and I was meeting some new friends there, and they were telling me different parables that they had grown up with in Kenya. And one of them was that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And I loved that, because it talked about listening twice as loud as you talk. And that's certainly been helpful to me at different times in my life, is just really remembering that if we're wanting to hear God's voice, sometimes we have to stop talking to God about all the things that are unsolved in our lives, or all the things we want, or all the change we want to see, and just be willing to be silent and listen. Okay, so we have a 3-part section coming up here. We'll touch on sort of 3 different aspects of stillness. We're going to look at how we can practice it in our own lives, how we can put it into practice in relationships with others, and then how do we think about it for world events. So to start off with part 1, peace with ourselves, being still and knowing God. And this is where I'm going to turn on the chat for you now. So look at the bottom of your screen, and you should be able to see a little box that says chat, so you can open it up. And in there is where you're going to be able to chat some ideas now. And the first question that I have for you that you can chat in about is, what does it look like for you when you are feeling totally at peace? And how do you know? Like, what characterizes being really at peace with yourself? So go ahead and as I'm talking about, I'll share a couple of ideas, but go ahead and chat in the chat box what your ideas are too. Oh, good. Someone wrote in that, feeling centered, right? So that being at peace feels like you're really centered. And I think that for me, that's about kind of really centering thought on God, as opposed to all the things I have to do or people in my lives, but really centering thought on God first. Another thing for me that really characterizes being at peace is just feeling sort of a sense of being able to feel joy, not because it's tethered to an experience or something good that just happened to us, but just feeling that sense of joy sort of from within, even in moments that are difficult or hard, but kind of feeling, really accessing that sense of true joy. Gratitude is another piece of it for me, that being at peace means just feeling grateful without necessarily having had something good happen, but looking to practice that sense of gratitude. Someone else wrote not feeling rushed or being on God's timetable rather than sort of on kind of on our own timetable. And that's great. That there's sort of this hurry sickness, I think, especially in America, maybe in Canada as well. And we have lots of folks on tonight from Canada. I meant to thank the Edmonton First Church of Christ Scientist in Edmonton, Canada, who's sponsoring this event tonight. So thank you for that. And welcome to all of you who are joining us from Canada. But this sense of sort of being hurried can really, I think, keep us from feeling that sense of being at peace. Because being at peace also for me is about being really centered on the present moment. That we're not thinking about the future and worrying about it or ruminating about the past, that we're really centered in just what we need to do today and what today is asking of us and doing the best we can with it today without worrying about what comes tomorrow. Oh, good. Claudia wrote in, forgetting our own problems. That's great, Claudia, that when we're at peace, we're not sort of rehearsing those challenges and problems so much, that we're not playing them over and over and over in our heads, that they're replaced by that sense of gratitude or joy or peace or vitality of some sort. So that's great that we don't sort of dwell on our problems. Another way of saying that, and I'll just pull up a list here on your screen that we can keep adding to if you have other things to say, but that really it's also about losing interest in conflict. That conflict perpetuates itself when it requires us to participate. Conflict. If we don't participate, conflict can't be. That it requires participation. And I think that being at peace really allows us to drop that sense of conflict, that we're just giving, we're just loving, we're not expecting anything in return, we're not waiting on other people to behave in a certain way so that we can feel satisfied or we can be happy with our lives. We're just focused on that sense of giving or contributing or living life and loving it. And in that process, that we lose interest in rehearsing conflict or playing stories in our mind that convince us of being stuck in conflict. Another thing I think is there's a sense of harmony and oneness we talked about, of aligning with God, that we don't judge others when we're truly at peace. We're not labeling them as certain things or this or that, but we're really just seeing others with sort of the way that God saw them. That there's a sense of trust, that we let things unfold as opposed to making them happen. That there's that sense of joy that's not dependent on material circumstances. And then a sense of satisfaction, really living in the present moment. So the next thing, and again, you're welcome to kind of chat in if you feel so inclined, but the next question here is, where in life do we often look for peace to be seen? So for example, family relationships could be one thing, or I know for many in my community that we are often looking for peace a lot in ourselves actually, but also so that it can be expressed outwardly in our society, so that we can see progress and peace really be expressed in government and in community and in respect of each other and other people, in international relationships, with other countries and so forth. Sometimes people will say, and I'll just pull up the list here, church experiences, relationships, family, politics, career, world events, busy schedules, health, etc. Now, as you're looking at these two different lists that you see on your screen today, I'm going to share a healing story with you that really had a lot to do with getting still for me. But I just want, what I think happens in the healing aspect of stillness is that getting still, really finding that sense of stillness and peace, focuses us on this left-hand column, that it's about finding peace with ourselves first. That's like a first step in healing, knowing the allness of God, the all power of that divine presence. And I think also another quality that's not up here, but that's important, is humility in finding peace. And that those that looking for that stillness first tends to do that, to align us with God. And often healing occurs when we find that oneness with God, and we understand more about the nature of God, because we let go of whatever we might be holding on to that would keep us from finding that, from seeing healing and from seeing that divine perfection in ourselves. Now, often what sometimes can happen is we start to think of prayer for healing as a problem-solving experience, where we have this problem sort of on the right-hand side, a problem with relationships, or a problem with finances, or a problem with career, or whatever it might be. And we start to kind of reason through with ideas what we can apply to that problem. But in my experience, Christian Science healing through Christian Science, is not about problem-solving prayer. It's actually about the discovery of what already is, the discovery of a spiritual reality that already is present. And when we glimpse that, in that place, no more change is needed. There's no more, we've lost the consciousness of our problems. Kind of like what Claudia was saying about forgetting our own problems. They tend to diminish with the huge sense of what God is about. And so healing then, rather than trying to solve a problem, it's more about discovering the unbroken relationship of us and God, that oneness. And in that place is where we see that we have all the qualities and all the attributes and all of the characteristics of divine love, divine presence of God. And therefore, that idea is what brings healing. It changes the way we think about our health, or about our situation, or about a relationship. And then we shift in our thought and our consciousness about how we handle it and how we deal with it. So that's what happened for me in this story. And I'm just going to share a brief experience with you about it. So years ago, I was in a situation where I was expecting family to come into town. I had a whole lot of things on my to-do list and on my plate. And I think I had been really thinking of myself as kind of a human doing, right? I was doing so much at this particular time in my life. And I woke up one morning in the middle of all of this activity and stress and very, very full days. And I had a very stiff neck. And I hadn't slept very well. And my first approach to respond to this was to really connect with God and feel the presence of God, and to grow spiritually in a way that would resolve the physical challenges, the physical discomfort and pain in my body. But as I kind of look back at it a little bit, my prayer was a little bit mixed up with the pressure and stress of feeling like I had to do all of these things. There was just so much to do. And I felt like I was having to prove myself somehow to others and make everything perfect. And I felt in charge of a lot of projects and things with my home and with my work at the time. And so I think my prayer was a little bit along the lines of feeling like I was, again, starting with this problem of the physical challenge and wanting God to be the presence that came in and resolved it for me. Sort of as if God was like this divine assistant that we call on to come help us when we have challenges. But then the rest of the time, we kind of are doing pretty well ourselves. So I think I had a little bit fallen into the trap of thinking that God was this idea that would help me, give me an idea to solve the problem, and I could go on my way. But needless to say, to those of you that have practiced spiritual healing, that didn't work. And after 3 days of discomfort, the third day, it had gotten so bad, the pain, that when I woke up, I wasn't able to turn my head even a millimeter. It was incredibly discouraging and frustrating to not be able to accomplish what I needed to accomplish. And at this point, the pain was so intense that I had to be lying in bed and I couldn't move. So as I was lying still, and I was really forced to be still, I finally realized the need to go into the closet and quiet my thoughts. And in that moment of quiet, one of the ideas that became so clear to me was this thought that came that said, I am the shepherd. Now, I hadn't been thinking about shepherds or sheep or anything particular, but I started to look up passages about shepherds and sheep in the Bible and to understand that relationship a little bit better. And I realized in the process that I had been so focused on being a shepherd to my kids and my family and my projects and my home life and the meal coming up for the holiday that we were celebrating, that I hadn't been really acknowledging God as my shepherd, really consciously. And when I started to think more about that, I realized I had to appreciate the qualities of being a sheep in God's pasture. And these were qualities like obedience and innocence and purity and restfulness and trust and willingness and yielding. And as I started to cherish each one of these qualities, I could literally feel these burdens of perfectionism, of feeling like it was all on my shoulders, of responsibility for others, just little by little sort of falling away. And it was being replaced by this huge, beautiful sense of what God is. That was what I wanted at the center of my life. I wanted to maintain a perspective where God wasn't like who I called on to come help in times of need, but God was already at the center of each day. My morning prayer kind of shifted during this time. And I don't know what it had been before exactly, but what it shifted to was waking up and really starting off my morning by just not out loud, but just in my thoughts, really saying, good morning, God. What do you have in store for today? And just expecting to see God's day unfold, that it was God's day. And I was participating in what God, divine presence, had already done, that the creation of the day was already complete. And I was just witnessing the way that harmony could unfold. Well, as I got really clear in this reality, what happened was little by little, as all those burdens fell away and all that stress, so did the pain. And eventually I was able to go downstairs on that third day and rejoin my family. But what I remember is that the feeling of quiet and stillness that had overtaken me was maintained when I went back into the family life and all the busy activity. That I suddenly did not, that's what I wanted to hold on to more than anything, more than having a perfect day or experience or a perfect project completed or whatever it was, that I wanted to hold on to that stillness and that oneness with God. And that became sort of the paramount kind of importance for me of what healing was really all about, that it was about discovering that sense of oneness with God. And I'll just share just a brief, fun little cartoon here. You'll probably see on your screen now. It says, it's a picture of a sheep and a shepherd. And it just says, you can't unfollow me. I'm your shepherd. And what I love about this is just the sense that the sheep are so attuned to the shepherd's voice that they can't lose track of the shepherd. And the shepherd will, of course, go and gather the sheep if the sheep are going astray. And that's what happens for us as well. Now, this passage that you'll see now on your screen is really, I think, one that has helped me in my life remember that stillness. And it says this: there is a rest in Christ, a peace in love. The thought of it stills complaint. The heaving surf of life's troubled sea foams itself away, and underneath is a deep settled calm. That's what I was discovering, that underneath all this activity and stress and things going on, there's a deep settled calm. And even if some of you feel like you would love to have more activity in your lives, you would love to have a million things to do during the day, that maybe there's a feeling of missing a sense of purpose, or feeling like you'd like to have more activity going on in your life, that the stillness is what connects us to others as well, and connects us to purposeful activity in our lives. That this deep settled calm is where we hear God speaking to us about our unique contribution. All right, so looking briefly now at part 2, relationships, being still and seeking God. And for me, what this means is that before we hear what someone else says, that we seek what God thinks about it. To me, this is what it means to have the same mind as Christ Jesus. Now, this is something Paul said in all of his teachings. And the way that I understand this idea that we have the mind of Christ, which is what he said in various ways, is that the same spirit, the same divine understanding of God and spirit of God that Jesus knew so well, that he could heal people and do all the good works that he did, he came to show us that we have access to that same mind, that same divine mind, divine consciousness that brings healing right here today. And that Paul went around to let people know that, to tell people. So what does having the mind of Christ mean exactly? Well, let's see, I'm going to make sure the chat box, I'd love it if you guys wanted to chat in again. Feel free to just chat in the chat box here if you have ideas for yourself about what it means to have this mind of Christ. I think there's lots of different aspects to it. But one of the aspects that's been really important to me is that the mind of Christ is not reactive. In numerous places when Jesus is traveling through his teachings and his healing work, and he sees someone else that wants him to react in some way. For example, when he gets to Jericho with his disciples, and blind Bartimaeus is down on the road and starts to shout at Jesus to heal him, to help him. What it says in the Bible that Jesus did is it says Jesus stood still. And then he goes and heals him. But it was at a time where Bartimaeus was shouting and the disciples were shouting back for him to be quiet, and he was shouting even louder, and there was a big crowd around. And for whatever reason, Jesus did not rush over and say, be quiet, I'll heal you. Just, let's all calm down. Jesus stood still. And to me, what this says is that the mind of Christ means we don't take our information from what is in front of us, from reacting to the circumstances in front of us. We get information directly from the stillness with God. And there's a few other things that I think the mind of Christ teaches us. And one of them is that we bring stillness to all we do. We don't get the stillness once we finish our work or once we finish a project, that we bring it to our activity. That we have compassion to think broadly or beyond ourselves. That there's not a sense of being superior to others, that there's an equality. That God is at the center of all of our activity and our thought, and that our thoughts originate and come from God. All right, so I'll just share one other real brief story with you here, and it's a friend of mine who was working in her house one day years ago, and she dropped a glass and it shattered into a million pieces. And in the process, one of the pieces got embedded in her eyeball. It was quite uncomfortable. And she was blinking, she could feel it in there, but it wasn't coming out. And her husband rushed her off to the emergency room so she could get it taken care of. Now, she was somebody that had practiced Christian Science healing for many years, and she'd practiced praying for healing, but she was again having a hard time getting still. So as she's in the emergency room there, she had the doctors look at it. They finally said they could see the piece of glass, that they would need to do a small operation to take it out, and she just could wait for a few minutes. Well, she decided to go make a phone call, and she called me and asked if I would pray with her for healing about this experience. And when she called, there was so much agitation and stress and worry and concern, and the concern of her husband and the concern of the doctors. And I could feel she was just kind of wrapped up in all of the thoughts of all of the others that were around her at that moment. The worry, the concern, the fear about her eyesight, about the procedure that might happen, et cetera, et cetera. So what I said to her was I'd be happy to pray with her so she could find that calm and that sense of being still, but that she should go back into the hospital and just love everything she saw. And she said she would do that. And I just started really praying and asking God for what I needed to know so that I could know that my friend could find her peace and her calm. And I just got this wonderful sense of the presence of God's love with her, that she was not in some place outside of God's love. She hadn't made a mistake and somehow been exempt from this powerful love that God offers each one of us, that it was right there with her in the middle of her experience in the emergency room. And as she walked back into the emergency room, that's what she felt. She suddenly, all of the stress and the anxiety and the worry and the concern and the worry about herself and her eyesight, all of that fell away. And she just started loving the patients. And she said she loved the hospital people and the doctors and her husband and everyone there. She just felt this incredible sense of God's love. And at the same time, when she blinked and the piece of glass just naturally just fell away out of her eye. And the doctors looked at her again and they said, well, it's no longer there, so it's fallen out by itself. You're welcome to just go on home. And she realized that as she found that sense of being able to love like that there was a peace in it, and that everything else just seemed really natural, that healing seems natural when we're in that place of aligning ourselves with God's love. Now, we'll just finish up here, just a couple more sections, and there's an idea that really helped my friend that I'll share with you, and it's this one. It's the sense of quietness and confidence is where we find our strength. In the quietness and in the confidence is where we find our strength. And it was in that peace of being able to love and finding that still place of love that she got her strength to not be afraid. And as the fear left, so did the problem, the difficulty. This piece of glass that seemed so embedded that nobody could get it out just naturally washed away as the fear washed away. And as her whole being just relaxed and settled into that quietness. Now, there is a Harvard Medical School professor that wrote an article a couple of years ago, and I'll just briefly touch on it. He was talking about over 100 cases in his medical practice where people were diagnosed with something incurable, and then they recovered without any intervention, without any medical intervention. And he said that he sees these trends in their experiences, that there are certain mental and spiritual principles associated with their recoveries. And he advocates for us studying what's going on there to better understand how these recoveries are happening without any intervention. Well, there's more to that story, but what's interesting about that was published a couple of years ago is that Mary Baker Eddy was asking that question over 120 years ago. She was diagnosed with something that had no cure. She was very ill and bedridden. Her friends thought she was about to pass on. And at that moment, she had an experience of reading one of Jesus' healings and feeling overcome by love. And that healed her physically. She was able to get up. She went on to live this long life. And she spent the rest of her life understanding what had happened to her and how this kind of healing could happen today, or in her time. And then she wrote about it in her Science and Health book so that people could practice it throughout time. And she talked about how when fear vanishes and is replaced by love, that the image of illness or sickness or a problem also vanishes with that fear. And it's replaced by this powerful concept of God that's impartial, universal love, and that unity between us, each one of us, and God. And that was her experience as well in her own healing and in the many healings that she enacted for people for decades and decades. Now, just to close today with our last section here, what does this mean for praying about the world? And how do we think about being at peace with the world? Well, I'll just share a little story with you that came up years ago when I was in graduate school. And it's the story of a contest for children. And they were asked to draw what peace looks like to them. So the winning drawing that was chosen from this contest was this. It was a picture of this roaring, rushing waterfall. And it came down and was turbulent. It was all stirred up in the pool below. But behind the waterfall, on a little ledge, the child had drawn a yellow canary. And the canary was pictured as singing. Now, I don't know if that rings any bells for you or says anything to you particularly about peace, but for me, what it says is that no matter what the news might be saying, no matter what might be rushing at us, that we can be like that little canary, that the stillness gives us the power to not be disturbed by whatever might be bombarding us on a daily basis. Now, Mary Baker Eddy, in her time, she felt like the news could be very bombarding, and sometimes there was a lot of fake news that was being perpetuated. I don't know if that sounds familiar to any of you in today's day and age, but there was no internet, obviously, and social media streams. But in the newspapers of her day that were being published, she felt there was a need for a presence, a news presence whose motive was to bring, almost was like to be like the canary, rather than getting into the tumbling and the turbulence of the typical day's news story. That would offer a different perspective. It would offer a perspective whose goal was to bless all humanity and to injure no one. It's called the Christian Science Monitor. It's a news source that still exists today with the same goal, to injure nobody, but to bless all of humanity. And I find that when I read it, it's like it sort of puts me a little bit on that ledge with the canary and keeps my thought focused on a new way of thinking about a particular news story. There was recently one on Syria, and it talked about sort of the moral imperative of Syria, that it wasn't so much about resolving conflicts between countries, but really seeing certain principles at work in Syria. And I just spent the rest of my day thinking about what are the principles that I know are at work in Syria right this moment. And it took me, the whole day it preoccupied my thought. And I just found that rather than being overwhelmed by the gas attacks and the counterattacks and whatever Assad might be doing or whatever might or might not be happening, that I was suddenly really focused on this sense of what the principles were that needed to be seen in that part of the world. And that felt like a constructive use of my time. I remember years ago, there was a woman who lived in a section of East and West Germany during the time that Germany was split into two parts. And I was talking with her. I think I was in college at the time. And she was telling me that she had prayed every single day for 10 years straight that the wall would come down between East and West Germany. And I was astounded at the time. I think I was only 20, so that was half my lifetime that she had been praying this way. And I just wondered what kept her going each day. Like, how could you keep praying for the world every single day without really seeing a lot of evidence, of change? And what she said to me was that, at this point, the wall had come down already. And what she said was that, she said, Laurie, how do events in the world happen? Where do they start? And she said, they begin in thought. And what changes thought? Well, prayer is what influences consciousness and thought. So the prayers that she was doing, she knew that every single prayer she was offering was chipping away at this mental block, this mental wall of thought that was keeping the wall, keeping the two parts of the country divided. And there's been some recent great news between North and South Korea that's been very encouraging about that part of the world today and seeing progress. But each one of us, as we commit to finding that stillness and being like that little canary on the ledge, that whatever prayers we're offering, it's chipping away at the mental obstacles that would try to keep people from finding peace, or keep nations from finding justice or human rights or a right sense of law. And so no prayer is ever wasted. It's always chipping away at those mental blocks that are trying to perpetuate violence or perpetuate problems in the world. So we've come to the end of our hour together, and none of you have posted questions. So you still have a few minutes. If you have any questions that you'd like to be answered, go ahead and open your question and answer box. And if you want to post any questions or any comments, or any anything you'd like clarified, just let me know. And I'll leave that question and answer box open as well at the end for about 15 minutes, and I'll stay and sort of answer questions that way as well, if you'd prefer to just sort of type them in one-on-one rather than during the web event. But we'll just in summary here, I'll just sort of go over, we talked about, oh, okay, I see there's actually a question. So we'll go to a couple of questions if you guys want to post them. Somebody asked the question, how to find stillness when in pain? And Ginny, I think I'm glad you've asked the question. I think that for many of us, that's one of the hardest times, I think, is to really get still when the pain seems very distracting. What I know about that, and what I can say about that question, is that what I have learned is to see that God is closer to us than the pain, than the experience of pain. And that in understanding that closeness of God, that the relief we're looking for is in turning from the focus and the fixation on the pain into what God is and what God knows. When I was lying in that bed, when I was having that challenge with my neck and my shoulders, if I even moved a muscle, it was just excruciating, the pain. If I sat completely still, it would sort of go out of my head for a moment. But when I had that inspiration about the sheep and the shepherd analogy, and when I started to think about God shepherding me so that I could then shepherd others, it just took me on this road of being so curious how I could do that better. And that became more alive to me than the experience of the pain. And I think that's what we're looking for in healing, is that we find an aspect of God's being and an aspect of our relationship to God, of our connection with God, that so arrests our thought that it kind of grabs hold of us and pulls us into understanding more about spirit and God, then we get pulled towards the experience of pain. And that's when we know we're on the right track in prayer. Because prayer isn't like this panacea that if we just say a few prayers, it'll smooth over the pain and we'll be done with it. It's a complete transformation of consciousness. And when we're experiencing pain, what's happening is our thought is being drawn towards that part of the body or that part of our experience that's constantly wanting to reinforce the experience of pain. And it's when we get sort of a thought that so arrests us that we can be preoccupied with that instead, that we know we're on the right track. It's sort of analogous to those experiences that some of you might know, where when you get really engrossed in a project and you forget to eat and time just passes by so quickly because you don't even notice, because you're so engrossed in the excitement of what you're learning or what you're studying or what you're thinking about. And that's that state of being so connected to our divine identity that the pain lessens and it diminishes in our consciousness. And then and ultimately, in my case, that it diminished to the point of where it went away. So I hope that's a little bit helpful, Ginny, but thank you for your question. Again, if you have other questions, feel free to post them. And then for the rest of you, I'll just kind of go into the summary here, and we'll just kind of go over a little bit of what we talked about, and then we'll conclude. And then if you'd like to post more questions at the end, feel free. So for me, what we talk about in stillness is this understanding that we want to practice tuning our lives into God on a regular basis, sort of fine-tuning our lives to get to feel that oneness with God. That with relationships with others, we're looking beyond the behavior to hear thoughts directly from God about knowing the way that we can address and be with our families, be in relationship with others where we're not reacting. And then finally, that every individual prayer for the world chips away at the mental blocks that would keep us divided. Mary Baker Eddy talks about how mind, the sense of consciousness of divine mind, that it revolves on a spiritual basis, on a spiritual axis, and its power is displayed and its presence felt in eternal stillness and immovable love. We just have one other question I'll answer here, and thank you for joining us today. And I'll just continue to answer questions for a few more minutes if you'd like to post them. Somebody said, how can we maintain a sense of order for self and also helping others find the balance and flexibility that's needed? And I think that for me, the sense of being still keeps us from feeling overwhelmed. That sometimes we can be overwhelmed by our feelings about something, and then it's very difficult to find where to start. When we're looking at a big project, maybe with disorder or organization, it can feel just it can feel like that, where we're just overwhelmed by trying to find a place where we can begin. And sometimes practicing stillness for me is just about remembering to do it. That we just get quiet in our thought, we get really still, and that's where we hear that still small voice that comes from the story of Elijah in the Bible, that gives us direction of just a little piece of this, where we can just start. And as we start to move forward, we feel God kind of pushing us, kind of moving us forward. It's so much easier for God to move us when we're in motion than when we're stuck or standing still. That being stuck is not a state of our divine nature. It's like wearing a mask and looking in the mirror and being confused why our face is green without realizing we're wearing the mask. That's what feeling stuck is like. That we think, why are we stuck? And what do we do to get unstuck? And how did we get here? And why are we stuck? And all of that is like wondering why our face is green. What we really need to do is recognize that we are so always in motion, and take the step that's right in front of us. And that's taking that step right in front of us often will just keep moving us forward. At least that's been my experience, is that whenever I've felt like I'm stuck or I don't know where to begin with something, often I'm getting a message about a little first step that I can take. And if I just really focus on and listen to that idea of what the step is right in front of me, that being in motion then helps me to see the way that God is moving and motivating me. So again, in those moments of being still is where we hear that voice of God. It's not a void, it's not an emptiness. It's about hearing the divine messages coming from God that direct us on any given day, on a daily basis. So thank you all so very much for joining today. Again, I'll leave the chat open for a few minutes and we can chat back and forth if you have comments or questions. But I will just close this web event by thanking again the Edmonton Church in Alberta, Canada, for sponsoring this event this afternoon. And if anybody missed it or would like to rewatch it, it will be available in a day or two. It will be sent to anyone who registered for this event. There'll be a video replay that you're welcome to share with family and friends or anyone you'd like. And so I just want to thank you all for being here today. And I joined you all from outside of Boston, Massachusetts, in the United States. And I was just happy to be able to hear a little bit from you during the webinar. And I look forward to any further comments that you would like to share with us today. Again, thanks for joining. Have a wonderful afternoon of stillness. Bye-bye.